February 28th, 2026. Lyman direction, eastern Ukraine. A Russian soldier walks along a dirt road. There is no artillery fire, no aircraft, no tanks in sight. The sky is quiet. Then a small buzzing sound appears above him. Within seconds, the situation changes completely. This is what modern war looks like now. Not always loud, not always massive. Sometimes it is silent, precise, and very close. Across the Lyman sector, a new type of battlefield is taking shape. Soldiers, vehicles, supply routes, and even advanced military systems are being watched from above almost constantly. What is happening here is not just another battle. It may be a preview of how wars will be fought in the future. The Lyman direction has become one of the clearest examples of what a drone-saturated battlefield looks like, because Ukrainian FPV units are operating there in large numbers, and they are targeting many types of Russian forces at the same time, instead of focusing on only one category of targets. Reports and combat footage from the area show drones striking infantry moving between positions, motorcycles used for fast movement, ATVs carrying supplies, logistics vans such as the UAZ Bukanka, larger trucks transporting ammunition and fuel, and even heavy military equipment when the opportunity appears, which means almost anything that moves can become a target within minutes. This constant drone presence is possible because drones provide continuous surveillance over roads, tree lines, intersections, and supply routes, and once a drone team identifies a frequently used route, they can monitor it for hours and wait for movement instead of searching randomly across the battlefield. This creates a situation where soldiers are not only afraid of artillery or aircraft, but also of being seen from above at any moment. And the danger does not always come with warning because small FPV drones are hard to hear until they are already very close. One of the most important changes caused by this type of warfare is that roads are slowly turning into kill zones, because vehicles must use roads to move quickly. But roads are also easy to monitor from the air, and movement on open terrain is very visible from above. When vehicles travel on open roads without tree cover or camouflage, they can often be detected early, and once detected, a drone can be launched and guided directly to the target, which means the road itself becomes one of the most dangerous places on the battlefield. Because of this constant surveillance, movement has become one of the most dangerous activities in this war. And this is a major change compared to older conflicts where soldiers were often safer while moving behind the front line. Now movement itself creates risk because any movement can be detected by reconnaissance drones. And once detected, the time between detection and strike can be very short, sometimes only a few minutes or even less. This situation is creating what military analysts sometimes call battlefield transparency, which means the battlefield is becoming more visible from above, and it is harder for units to move without being detected. When the battlefield becomes transparent, mobility becomes dangerous instead of safe, and armies must change how they move, how they supply troops, and how they rotate units at the front. Another important effect is that drones are slowing down operations because units cannot move freely and must wait for night, bad weather, or electronic warfare support before moving vehicles or troops. This slows logistics, slows reinforcements, slows evacuation of wounded soldiers, and slows offensive operations, which means drones are not only destroying targets, but also reducing the speed of military operations across the entire sector. At the same time, drones are increasing attrition warfare, because instead of large battles with massive losses in a short time, drones create continuous small losses every day by destroying vehicles, equipment, and individual soldiers. And over time, these losses accumulate and weaken an army's ability to sustain operations. This type of warfare is slower but very effective because it targets logistics, mobility, and manpower at the same time. From a military perspective, this shows that drones are no longer just tactical weapons used occasionally for reconnaissance or small strikes, but are becoming tools for controlling the battlefield by watching movement, restricting logistics, forcing units to change routes, and creating constant pressure on soldiers and vehicles. In other words, drones are starting to influence not only individual battles, but also how entire sectors operate. And this is why many analysts believe that drone warfare is becoming one of the defining features of modern land warfare. As drones began to dominate the airspace above roads and open terrain, soldiers started looking for ways to hide from them, and this led to new improvisations on the battlefield. One of the most interesting developments on the Lyman front is the use of so-called anti-drone cloaks by Russian soldiers. But the real battlefield results show that these cloaks provide only limited protection and cannot stop a direct FPV drone attack. These cloaks are usually made from metallized fabric designed to reduce thermal signature, which means they are supposed to make a soldier harder to see through thermal cameras, especially during cold weather when body heat stands out clearly against the background. The important detail is that these cloaks do not make a soldier invisible, and they only reduce thermal detection under certain conditions, such as when the temperature difference between the human body and the environment is not too high. If the weather is cold and the human body is much warmer than the ground, thermal cameras can still detect a heat source even if it is partially covered. And if the drone operator uses a regular daylight camera instead of thermal imaging, the cloak does almost nothing to hide the shape of a person. Another major problem is movement detection, because even if thermal signature is reduced, movement is still visible from above. And drones have a strong top-down advantage that allows operators to see outlines, shadows, and movement patterns very clearly. A person moving between trees, bushes, or trenches can often be detected not because of heat, but because of motion, shape, or contrast with the environment. And once detected, the drone operator can follow the target until the moment of attack. This creates an important difference between camouflage and protection, because camouflage is meant to reduce the chance of being seen, while protection is meant to stop damage after being hit. And anti-drone cloaks belong to the first category, not the second. They may reduce detection probability in some situations, but they cannot protect a soldier from a direct hit by a kamikaze drone, which means they are more like camouflage uniforms than body armor. Many soldiers still use these cloaks because they provide psychological comfort, and psychological comfort is very important in war, especially when soldiers know that drones may be watching from above at any moment. Equipment that makes a soldier feel less visible can reduce stress and fear, even if the real survival benefit is limited. And this is something seen in many wars where soldiers adopt equipment that improves confidence more than actual protection. The broader lesson from this situation is that concealment is becoming harder in modern war, because detection technology is improving faster than camouflage technology. And drones combine several detection methods at the same time, including visual cameras, thermal cameras, and persistent observation from above. In older wars, soldiers could hide in forests, trenches, or buildings and remain relatively safe if they stayed quiet. But now drones can observe an area for long periods and detect even small signs of movement or unusual shapes. This leads to the idea that the battlefield is becoming more transparent, meaning it is harder to hide large movements, vehicles, or even individual soldiers, especially during daytime operations. When the battlefield becomes transparent, traditional camouflage methods become less effective, and armies must rely more on electronic warfare, air defense against drones, deception, decoys, and rapid movement instead of simply hiding. From a military and geopolitical perspective, this shows an important trend in modern warfare, which is that detection technology is advancing faster than concealment technology. And this changes how armies must operate in future conflicts. Armies that cannot hide will need to move faster, disperse forces, use decoys, and protect logistics and air defense systems in new ways, because being detected often means being targeted shortly after. While individual soldiers struggled to hide from drones, something even more significant was happening when drones began targeting high-value military systems. One of the most important events in the Lyman sector was the strike on the radar of a Russian S-300V air defense system, because destroying the radar is often more important than destroying the missile launchers themselves. The S-300V is a long-range air defense system designed to intercept aircraft, cruise missiles, and even ballistic missiles, but the entire system depends heavily on its radar, which detects targets, tracks them, and guides the missiles toward them. The key point is that the radar is the eyes of the system, and without its eyes, the system becomes almost blind and much less effective, even if the missile launchers are still intact and ready to fire. This is why many modern military doctrines focus on destroying sensors first, because if you destroy the sensor, the weapon system cannot see the target and cannot operate effectively. This concept is often summarized by the idea of destroy the sensor, not the launcher, which reflects how modern warfare is increasingly focused on networks and information rather than only physical destruction. The strike on the S-300V radar also demonstrates what many analysts call cost asymmetry warfare, which means a very cheap weapon can destroy or disable a very expensive system. An FPV drone may cost only a few $100s, while a radar unit for a major air defense system can cost tens of millions of dollars, which creates a massive cost imbalance. When a cheap system can destroy an expensive system, the economic logic of warfare begins to change, because the side that can produce many cheap weapons may be able to damage systems that are far more expensive and harder to replace. This situation can be described as economic warfare on the battlefield, because the goal is not only to destroy equipment, but also to force the enemy to spend more money replacing expensive systems than the attacker spends destroying them. If one side can destroy a $10 million system using a drone that costs only a few $100s, then over time, this creates financial pressure and reduces the enemy's ability to maintain complex military networks. This also raises questions about air defense survivability in modern war, because large radar systems are valuable targets and can be detected by reconnaissance drones, satellites, or electronic intelligence systems. Once the radar position is known, small drones, artillery, or missiles can be used to attack it, which means air defense systems must move often, hide carefully, and operate in dispersed networks rather than fixed positions. This situation is closely related to what military analysts call sensor warfare and network warfare, where the goal is not simply to destroy vehicles or individual units, but to destroy the sensors, communications, and command networks that allow the enemy to operate effectively. In modern war, information and detection are often more important than the weapon itself, because a missile launcher without targeting information is far less dangerous than a launcher connected to a functioning radar and command network. From a strategic perspective, this shows that modern warfare is increasingly about destroying systems rather than destroying individual vehicles. And this is a very important change in military thinking. Instead of focusing only on tanks, trucks, or infantry units, modern armies try to disable radar systems, communication nodes, command centers, and logistics networks, because destroying these elements can weaken the entire military structure instead of only one unit. This type of warfare also suggests that future conflicts may involve more distributed systems, mobile sensors, decoys, electronic warfare units, and redundant networks, because large, expensive, and stationary systems are becoming more vulnerable to small and cheap weapons. Armies may need to adapt by spreading their equipment, using fake targets, moving frequently, and protecting sensors more carefully than before. But destroying high-value systems is only one part of the story. The constant drone presence is also changing something even more important: the ability of an army to move and supply its forces. One of the most important developments in the Lyman sector is that Russian logistics routes are being monitored almost constantly by drones. And this has changed the battlefield in ways that are not always visible in traditional battle reports. Instead of large battles deciding everything in a single day, the war in this area often becomes a continuous effort to disrupt supply routes, destroy transport vehicles, and slow the movement of troops and equipment. Logistics has always been the backbone of war, because armies cannot fight without ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, and medical evacuation, and every army depends on roads and transport routes to move these supplies forward. When drones monitor these routes from above, vehicles moving along open roads become very easy targets, especially if they move during daylight and without cover from trees or buildings. Many attacks happen because vehicles travel on predictable routes, and predictable movement is dangerous when the enemy has drones watching the same roads every day. If a route is used frequently, drone operators can simply observe the area and wait for movement instead of searching large areas, which increases the chance of detection and makes every trip more dangerous. Another problem is that many vehicles move without infantry escort, and this makes them more vulnerable because there are no soldiers on the ground watching the sky, listening for drones, or providing immediate reaction when a drone approaches. Without infantry support, drivers often have very little time to react, and FPV drones attacking from above can hit vehicles before anyone can escape or hide. This situation is especially dangerous for armored vehicles and tanks while they are moving between positions, because a tank in combat usually has infantry support, defensive positions, and awareness of enemy threats. But a tank moving along a road during transfer is often exposed, predictable, and not ready for an attack from above. In many cases, tanks are more vulnerable while moving between positions than when they are actually fighting, and this is a major change in how armored warfare works. Because of these conditions, many roads in the combat zone are slowly becoming what soldiers sometimes call death zones, which means areas where movement is extremely dangerous because drones may appear at any time. This does not mean every vehicle will be destroyed, but it means every movement carries risk, and this risk affects planning, scheduling, and operations across the entire sector. The constant drone threat also creates supply chain vulnerability, because if trucks carrying ammunition or fuel are destroyed, frontline units may not receive the supplies they need, and this reduces their ability to fight effectively. Even small disruptions in logistics can slow operations, delay attacks, and weaken defensive positions, which means drones are affecting the war at an operational level, not only at a tactical level. Another effect is the reduction of operational tempo, because units cannot move freely and must wait for night, fog, rain, or electronic warfare support before moving vehicles. And this slows down reinforcement, supply deliveries, and evacuation of wounded soldiers. Slower movement means slower operations, and slower operations can change the outcome of battles over time. There is also a morale impact, because soldiers know that roads and transport routes are dangerous, and this creates constant stress for drivers, logistics crews, and soldiers being transported to or from the front line. Evacuating wounded soldiers also becomes more difficult when medical vehicles can be targeted during movement, which adds another layer of pressure on units operating in these areas. All of this contributes to attrition warfare, where losses happen slowly but continuously, and instead of large battles deciding everything, the war becomes a long process of destroying vehicles, equipment, and supplies over time until one side can no longer sustain operations. In this sense, drones are turning logistics into a frontline activity because supply routes are no longer safe areas behind the front, but are now part of the battlefield itself. From a strategic perspective, this leads to a very important conclusion, which is that if logistics cannot move, an army cannot attack. And if an army cannot attack, it eventually loses initiative and momentum. This is why disrupting supply routes has always been a key part of military strategy, and drones are now making this task easier and cheaper than in the past. As vehicles and logistics became vulnerable, infantry units tried to adapt by hiding in trees, bushes, trenches, and abandoned buildings, but drones were already changing infantry survival as well. One of the clearest signs of how drone warfare is changing combat can be seen in how infantry units try to survive on the battlefield, because many soldiers now spend as much time hiding from drones as they do fighting enemy troops. Soldiers hide in trees, bushes, trenches, abandoned buildings, and temporary shelters, and they try to reduce movement because movement often leads to detection. Some lie completely still, some pretend to be dead, and others try to run between trees when they hear a drone approaching. But many of these methods are no longer reliable because drones observe from above and can wait until the right moment to strike. The main reason these methods often fail is the combination of reconnaissance drones and strike drones working together as part of a system rather than acting independently. A reconnaissance drone may locate a soldier, vehicle, or artillery position and then send coordinates to a strike drone unit, which launches an FPV drone to attack the target. And if the first strike does not destroy the target, another drone can be sent to complete the attack. This process is often called a kill chain, and it usually follows a simple sequence. Reconnaissance detects the target, coordinates are transmitted, a strike drone is launched, the target is hit, and then additional strikes are conducted if necessary. This system works because of persistent surveillance, which means drones can watch the same area for long periods and wait for movement instead of searching large areas continuously. When drones can observe roads, tree lines, trench entrances, and buildings for hours, it becomes very difficult for soldiers to move without being detected at some point. And once detected, the time between detection and strike is becoming shorter and shorter. Artillery systems are also affected by this new type of warfare, especially systems like the Grad multiple launch rocket system, which can be detected shortly after firing because the rocket launch produces a flash and smoke that can be seen from the air. Once the launch position is identified, drones can be sent to strike the launcher, which means artillery units must shoot and move quickly if they want to survive. If they remain in the same position for too long, they risk being attacked by drones or artillery guided by drone reconnaissance. This situation shows that survivability on the battlefield is decreasing for many types of units, including infantry, artillery, logistics vehicles, and even air defense systems, because drones reduce the ability to hide and increase the speed at which targets can be attacked. In the past, rear areas were often relatively safe compared to the front line. But now drones can reach many areas behind the front, which means there is often no completely safe rear area anymore. There is also a strong psychological effect on soldiers, because the threat from above is constant and unpredictable, and soldiers know that a drone can appear at any moment without warning. This creates a different type of stress compared to traditional artillery or small arms fire, because drones are precise, visible, and often record the attack, which increases fear and pressure on soldiers operating in drone-heavy areas. Looking toward the future, some analysts believe this may lead to drone swarm warfare and more battlefield automation, where large numbers of drones operate together, share information, and attack targets in coordinated ways. This could create a battlefield where machines play a larger role in detection and attack decisions, which raises questions about how warfare will change when more tasks are performed by autonomous or semi-autonomous systems. From a broader perspective, modern war is moving toward a human versus machine battlefield, where soldiers must constantly avoid detection by sensors, cameras, and drones, and survival depends not only on weapons and armor, but also on concealment, electronic warfare, and mobility. The battlefield is becoming more transparent, and the time between detection and strike is shrinking, which changes how armies must operate and how soldiers experience war. When all of these elements are combined, from infantry to logistics to air defense systems, a larger picture begins to appear about the future of warfare. The events around Lyman show that drones are now putting pressure on the entire chain of military operations, from individual soldiers and vehicles to logistics routes and even air defense systems. And this pressure reduces the ability of Russian forces to move safely and operate normally. Over time, this changes how battles are fought, because movement becomes dangerous, supply becomes harder, and expensive systems become vulnerable to very cheap weapons. This situation also shows a larger geopolitical reality, where cheap drones are challenging expensive armies, and the battlefield is becoming more transparent, while mobility is becoming one of the most dangerous activities in war. In the future, industrial production of drones may become as important as tanks or aircraft, and this could lead to a form of warfare where technology changes the balance of power and makes war more accessible to smaller forces. Modern war may not be decided only by tanks, aircraft, or missiles anymore. It may increasingly be decided by small machines in the sky and the people who operate them from miles away. If you want to follow more deep military analysis and battlefield reports like this, remember to subscribe to the Military Force channel.